So we're going to learn a portion of the Mamar, which the Rabbi delivered on Shabbos Parshas Vayikra. The date was the 3rd of Nisan. The year was Tafshem Membeis, which corresponds approximately to 1982. So it's spring of 1982, and the Mamar opens with the verse that introduces Parshas HaKorbanos. So the Parsha, or the book, gets introduced with the idea of Moshe Rabbeinu being spoken to by God and the loving call that precedes that communication. And then we begin Parshas HaKorbanos. And Parshas HaKorbanos begins with the words, Adam ki Yakriv Mikem. A person, when he offers from amongst you, literally draws close. Often the terminology is a sacrifice. I hate the terminology because it's an inaccurate translation. It's a Greek idea. It has absolutely nothing to do with korbanot. Nothing. As we'll learn a little later. But the word Yakriv literally means to draw close. So Adam ki Yakriv, a person when he draws close from you, korban la Hashem, to bring a korban. So the Torah says the korban can be min behema, from an animal, min bakar, from cattle, from sheep. That's what you should do to be takrivu, to draw close, korbanchem, your offering. So the Rebbe opens the Mamar with a diuk, with a precise analysis from the Rebbe Rashab, from the 5th Rebbe, who's the Bala Hilula. His passing is on the 2nd day of Nisan, which this year it's a month off. And he says we have to understand this idea of Adam ki Yakriv. Like, we start the Parsha, the portion of the Torah speaks about korbanot, to say, okay, when a person draws close. Okay, I don't need that flowery stuff when a person draws close. This is a book of laws, so we should get laws. What's the law? The law should be Im Oila Karbane. That's all. Like, start off with the Karzim. Hashem spoke to Moshe, I want to tell you about Karbanot. Here's how Karbanot go. Instead, we get like this poetic introduction. Adam ki Yakriv Mikem. The person, when he wants to draw close. Does it say when a person wants to cleave to Hashem, so then he should put on tefillin? Does it say when a person wants to create a spiritual abode in his house, then he should put up a mezuzah? It's a fact. God gives you instructions, put on tefillin. It doesn't say, if you want to have a life which is elevated, and you want to keep Shabbat, here's how to keep Shabbat. It says keep Shabbos, finished. So why do we introduce this? Of all parshas, it gets this big introduction. Adam ki Yakriv Mikem, a person should have started out Timayla Karbane. If an ascent offering, this is how it goes. If it's a sin offering, that's how it goes. State the facts. Parshas Vayikra, and in general, the book of Leviticus is not a book of narration. It's not a book of stories. It's not a book of events. It's a book of facts. It's halachas. It's almost like Mishnah. So here's what you're supposed to do. A, B, C, D. So why here, all of a sudden, we get this whole flowery introduction. And we also have to understand why it's called Adam, of all people. Remember, there are 4 kinds of people, or 4 names, 4 titles that are used for people. And the Daled Shemesh, and the 4 different names which are used for humanity, as is discussed in the Zohar, we have Enosh, Gever, Ish, and Adam. That's the 4 words. And in the terminology of Enosh, represents a person with many weaknesses, many faults, many shortcomings. The Gever also has certain shortcomings. However, the Gever works with the Enosh to turn him into an Ish or an Adam. That's basically how it goes. So Adam is considered to be the most virtuous form of person. We know Adam is the Madrega Yes and Eilis. Now, one second. Korbanot, most people are aware, come from where? Come from the notion of a sin. We fall short, so we bring Hashem a gift. We try to do whatever we can, or whatever the Torah tells us we can do, in order to rehabilitate the relationship. So we're talking about somebody who's not batting 1,000. We're talking about somebody who's fallen short. So why do we call it an Adam for? An Adam is the highest virtue that a person could be ascribed to. Which, as an aside, many people in the Western world, when they'll fail, they'll say, sorry, I'm only human. And our Torah response is, Zaya mensch, be a human. Don't be an animal. Don't be a fool. Don't act habitually Don't simply follow your instincts. Be a mensch. Let's be a mensch. A mensch, a person who can understand ideas and be motivated to go beyond his or her limitations. So being human is not the excuse for my faults. Being human is the expectation for greatness that we should rise beyond. So why would you call the parsha that discusses korbanos? Why do you call it an Adam for? And then the Rebbe finishes the opening volley of this Mamar up with famous diukim. They go back to the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah, why it says Adam ki Yakriv Mikem. And Adam ki Yakriv Mikem means, it sounds like the offering is brought Mikem from you, from amongst you. It almost could like allude to like a human sacrifice. Like it doesn't really, but it could. So it would be a simpler way to write this. The more grammatical way to write this would be Adam Mikem, a person from amongst you, ki Yakriv, when they draw close. But instead it says Adam ki Yakriv Mikem, a person when he offers from you. Offers from you seems to indicate somehow there's this personal part of the giving. That we're giving a portion of ourselves. We're giving some of our humanity. What does that mean? Why would I give? One of us will give, not we will give one of us. So this is another question which the Rebbe kind of peaks over here, and we're going to go together into the Biur Inyan. So the second paragraph of the Mamar of Biur Inyan, trying to understand this idea, first and foremost, as to why we get this whole introduction, and why we use that terminology, and lastly, why is it that the person brings the offering from you. Tehine Mavur Betanya, it's explained in Tanya in the 37th chapter. And the truth is, it's not an original Tanya idea. This idea is articulated previously already in Eitz Chaim, which is the manuscripts of the Arizal's teachings. Eitz Chaim is authored by Reb Chaim Vital. So it explains in Tanya, quoting Kisvei Arizal, the neshama atzma eino tzricha tikun. The neshama, the soul, doesn't need to be fixed. The soul was not sent to this world to inhabit a body because the soul was broken. There was nothing wrong with the soul. The soul does not need to be rectified. So why did the soul come into a bodily or corporeal reality? Why does the soul have to deal with the limitations of everyday life? Why couldn't the soul soar as it had prior and as it will after? And the answer is, V'la yarda, it didn't come down, so to speak, elo l'takenes haguf. The soul comes down into a bodily reality not to fix the soul. The soul comes into a bodily reality to fix the body. The body's got issues. The body's got problems. The body is what needs engineering. And it's not really only the body. It's the corporeal reality of the body, which is snarling, arrogant, slothful, spiteful, and every other negative idea you can come up with. You got a body, you got those issues. And there's the nefesh habahamis, there's the animal soul, there's the psyche, there's the psychoschematic of a person, in which every person is motivated ultimately by selfishness. Every person is motivated by carnal pleasure. Every person is pushed along by negative forces which are not about being sweet and compassionate and good and nice and holy and humble. So that has to be fixed. But ultimately, it's not just about fixing yourself. Ultimately, it's about chelke ba'olam. Every one of us has a little piece of this world. A little piece of this world that was created by God in a broken fashion because God expects us to fix it. That's what you came here for. You didn't come to this world because the neshama was broken, the neshama was perfect. From the neshama's perspective alone, you could have stayed on high. The reason that we come to this world is because the body is broken, because the animal soul needs engineering, because the world needs to be fixed. And that is to say, laseis mikol inyani ha'elam, to make of all worldly matters, mishkan or migdash le'yizbarech, a mishkan, which is a permutation of the word shechina, comes from the notion of dwelling, and a migdash is a sanctuary. So we came to this world to make this world a godly place. The Friedrich Rabbi explains in the Mamarim of Basilagani that one of the primary modes of making this world a godly place, at least in the Mishkan and the Migdash, was the Aveda of Karbonis, was this business of offerings. Offerings. The Karban, Uloshin kiruv. The word korban, as I said earlier, is not a sacrifice. In fact, the word sacrifice has absolutely nothing to do with a korban. Sacrifice denotes pain. Sacrifice denotes giving something away. Sacrifice denotes that it hurts you. That's what a sacrifice is. And there are some faith systems that believe in sacrifices. You have to make a sacrifice. You need to give till it hurts. You need to sand your knees with sandpaper and kneel in acid. I don't know, whatever it is. How it's flagellation and torture or whatever else it is. We don't believe in that. Torah doesn't believe we should be torturing ourselves. Torah doesn't believe that a person has to make a sacrifice. Meaning it's hard, make a sacrifice. No, that's not what a korban is. It might be that the korban entails some sacrifice. If a person does not have endless funds and then he has to spend his money on an animal that ends up turning into ashes a half hour later, he feels maybe he made a bit of a sacrifice. But that's not what it's about. It's like when you buy flowers, not you. When your husband buys flowers, when I buy flowers for my wife, it's a sacrifice. What, $25 is a sacrifice? $30 is a sacrifice? I can think of bigger sacrifices. But it does something special. Precisely because, first of all, to males it makes no sense. And secondly, because it'll be wilted in 5 days. So what's the point? It's a waste of money. That's how we see it. That's not how women see it. God says to us, you bring a korban. You don't have to understand it. It's not your business. Your business is to do as I say. Now, again, is it possible that the sacrifice entailed in the offering? Yes, it is. And what if somebody's a multimillionaire, has more money than they could spend if they live for 120 years? Is the korban worthless? Is the korban meaningless because he has so much money? Does he have to bring 5,000 korbanot until it hurts? The answer is no. You have to do what Torah says. So is it a beautiful thing if a person spends a lot of money on a pair of film or on beautiful candlesticks or on buying himself an exquisite Megillah and he didn't have the money? Or a person gives tzedakah, gives away. A person comes and he says, I'm a needy, and the other person says, you're needy? Let me see what I can do. And he actually goes and takes a loan to give tzedakah. I knew somebody like that. I knew a person who took a loan to give tzedakah. He didn't have the money, took a loan so he should be able to give tzedakah. So, on one hand, that's a big sacrifice. But then again, the point is not, and Hashem values the sacrifice. There's no question. When a person takes a loan to be able to be charitable, that's, in Hashem's eyes, that's tremendously valued. But that's not the point. The point was that a good thing was done. The point is that somebody who is needy had their needs taken care of. And that came as a result of your efforts. So whether or not it actually hurt you to give the money, or didn't hurt you to give the money, the most important part of the tzedakah is the recipient of the tzedakah. So it's actually not about sacrifice. This is, as I said, a profoundly un-Jewish idea. It doesn't mean God doesn't value sacrifices. That's not what korbanot are. God values korbanot because He does. It's a mystery. And the word korban, already in the 2nd century, is documented in the 2nd book of Kabbalah, which is called Sefer HaBohir. It's documented as Lashon Kiruv. That the word korban does not come from the origin of sacrifice, it comes from the origin of closeness. That's what the word means. That's the etymology of the word. So what is the idea of korbanot? It doesn't just mean to bring yourself close to God. Meaning, if I do this, I'll be close to God. The korban in and of itself represents a closeness to God. In what sense? That the idea of a korban is lekare vinyane ha'olam, to take worldly matters and to bring them closer to God. The world in and of itself seems distant from God. Organically speaking, the world does not naturally reflect God's presence. But our mission in life is to bring the world closer, to bring worldliness closer. Now, olam, which is the Hebrew term for world, is also miloshin helam v'hester. It also comes from the terminology of concealment, because the nature of this world requires concealment. Just like, for example, if you had a picture projected on the wall and then you couldn't see it because it's light, because the sun is shining. Remember those outdoor theaters you could pull in and watch? They never work during the day. How come? Because you can't see anything. So what did you need? You needed darkness. Only under the cover of darkness could those movies be useful. In other words, the concept then of being able to see something required the opposite of light, required darkness. In order for this world to feel like a world, in order for us to be able to have this independent kind of experience in existence as if we have the freedom to choose, Who's God? Never heard of him. Or, okay, I'll bow my head in submission. I'll listen to him today. In order for that to happen, what's required? What's required is the notion of a world that's necessarily dark. Because without the darkness, you wouldn't see anything. So the world is hell of a hester. And the world, by its nature then, conceals godliness and is not malleable, it would seem, for use of a godly purpose. The world left to its own devices does not become a holy place. People left to their own devices do not become supercharged with holiness. People left to their own devices will behave in the worst way possible. There'll be a jungle, wild animals, where the stronger one eats the weaker one. So in order to have a world in which we have goodness happen, what's required? A Torah, teachers, guides, mentors. That's required for us to learn what is right and what is wrong, and then to be coached along to overcome our weaknesses, our foibles, our demerits, and to be able to transcend ourselves and do what's right. So that means to take this world, which is actually necessary for the world to be a world, but ultimately, like, there's a collateral damage. You needed to have the darkness in order to see the movie, but now everything's dark. So we live in a dark world. The dark world, which it's dark. That hell of a hester has to be then transformed into an expression of light. And that expression of light ultimately is when the world becomes a keli, a vessel for divinity. Ukemaimer, like the expression is brought down in the Zohar, Raza de Korbana, Oila ad Raza de Seif. The mystery of the offerings is something that moves or touches or kind of engages the mystery of the oneness of the infinite. In other words, the hainu, that is to say, that a person takes all worldliness and worldly matters and he turns that into a dira loy yizbarech, a dwelling place for God, and he brings into this world, which screams, I'm independent, I have no creator. He brings into this world a profound sense of awareness that there is a God and a creator, not only once upon a time, but right now. And that's not simple. That's like swimming upstream. But it can be done. And do you know why it can be done? And do you know who can do this? So the Rebbe says this is the answer to the question. The question was, why do we get this introduction to Adam ki Yakriv Mikem, like some kind of narrative? When a person decides, just say, Yemayla Karbanai. And the answer is we first needed to know what a korban is. Now that we understand that a korban is not a sacrifice, but an act of closeness. Closeness not just on a personal level, not just that we're drawing close, but that we're bringing the world closer to Hashem. That we are denting the darkness that God necessarily put in place so that we might re-engineer it. Now you know what a korban is. And that's why, in order to bring a korban, you know what you need to be? You need to be a mensch. You know what a mensch is? A mensch is a person who does what's challenging and difficult because it's right. A mensch is a person who doesn't follow his whims or his foibles. A mensch is a person who doesn't give in to every instinct, lust, craving, or desire. A mensch is a person who does what has to be done because that's the right thing to do. So that's why it says Adam. Adam ki Yakriv. Adam. And Adam in Yiddish, a mensch ki Yakriv, when he draws close. The hakoyach lekarev esenyane ha'ilum lelikus. The ability, the wherewithal to be a bridge builder. The ability to be a transformer. The ability to take this material world and make it into something godly and holy, in as much as by its amino acid definition, it denies godliness. It has to deny godliness, because otherwise it couldn't be a world. And you're taking this olam, this helam, and you're making it a place that reflects godliness. There's only one creature that can do that. A mensch. No elephants, no rhinoceroses, no cats, dogs, no foxes, not even porpoises. No living creature can do this. Only an Adam. And do you know why an Adam could do this? The hakoyach lekarev esenyane ha'elam. The wherewithal, the ability to be able to bring this world, which is by its very creation distant, proverbially speaking, to make that close, Adam. That comes from the Adam element. That comes from the Adam dimension. What does that mean? What does it mean to be an Adam? So the thing, my friends, is like this. The Adam Nikra, a person is called Adam al Shem Adam Elyon. This is a shalah. It's brought down in a number of places. That the word Adam, the name Adam, comes from the terminology Adama. Adama means in the image of. Ve'inyan Adam Elyon, the notion of in the image of, as Alter Rebbe explains in Likutei Torah in this week's Torah portion. The Neshamas Yisrael hem bechinas shluchim shalamayla, that the soul is an agent, an emissary, an ambassador of none other than Almighty God Himself. That's what a neshama is. V'shaluchei shaladam ha'elyon, because it's an ambassador, because it's somebody who's empowered to represent the Adam ha'elyon, the supernal concept of the ultimate mensch, which is God. So because we're able to represent God, that's how we are in the image of God. We have godly ability. The Rebbe says, really, this helps us understand why our sages said you have to respect mitzvahs. Why do you have to respect mitzvahs? Shem shluchai, because they're my agents. The shluchai shladam elyon kamaisei. If you don't respect a mitzvah, ultimately, who don't you respect? Hashem. Why do we respect it? Because it's God's mitzvah. It's God's mitzvah. There's this famous idea that even when you have this mitzvah of covering the blood of a wild animal, of a bird, you don't do it with your foot, you kick dust. Do it with your hand. Why? Because you have to respect the mitzvah. You're not respecting the blood, you're not respecting the sawdust, you're respecting the Creator. And the Creator, He gave us mitzvahs. And the mitzvahs, like the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 23 in Tanya, becomes like a limb. It's a limb. A limb is one with the soul. The soul expresses itself through its limbs. And therefore, whenever a mitzvah is being performed, this is exactly what God wanted on this world. When the mitzvah is being done, that's exactly what God wanted when He created the world, that this mitzvah should be done by you, right now. So the world now is functioning as it was meant to be. And this becomes an expression of divinity, much like the soul can express itself through its hands, feet, eyes, ears, and nose. So this is the business of us being shluchim, us being God's agents, representing God. Well, the Maila Yeser, furthermore we say, not only can we be like an agent or emissary of God, in which case we have to be in God's image, but we also say further, we say this in our daily blessings, Neshama shenasatabi, that the soul that you gave me, tahirihi, is pure. Which means, the sheirush makar hanashama hu b'chinas tehiru ilaha, that the source of the soul comes from the purest of the element of divinity, which is even higher than the world of Atzilus. Well, the Maila Yeser, if you go even deeper, sheirush hanashama is the origin of all souls, hu ba'atzmusa yizbarach, is in the essence of divinity itself. The Hine Ksiv, behold, it's written, Im HaMelech b'malachta yashuvo, or yashvu sham. This is a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim. It's a little hard pasuk to understand. It sounds like the pasuk, at least what Rashi explains it is, that the people were there only because they were doing the king's bidding. So there was these people doing some work, like pottery makers. But they were there, Im HaMelech b'malachta. They were there with the king because the only reason they were there was because they were representing the king, or they were doing what the king wanted. The king wanted this work to be done. So by being there, by doing this work, these pottery makers, they became, like so to speak, sitting with the king. But our sages explain this verse a little bit differently. The Rus Rabbah, the Medrash and Rus says that the word Nimlach means as if God had consulted. And it says, B'min Nimlach, who did God consult with? Everybody knows you need a consultant. Anything you want to do. Who is God's consultant? And the answer is Nishmeseim Shal Tzadikim, the Neshamas of the righteous. Because the Hamlacha, the consultation for Briyas HaElamus, was the Neshamas Yisrael, the souls of Israel. So the souls then predate and come from a higher or loftier place than the world comes from. Because it was the souls who were the consultants for creation itself. Because the source of the soul is in the very essence of divinity. And that's the meaning of Adam, Adama, a person in the image of and likeness of. Because we're in the likeness of He who is Most High, that's why it's possible for us to bring the world into a state of transformation. This is why we can bridge heaven and earth, because of who we are, because we're an Adam. And that's why the verse has to be introduced to the concept of karbanos, because otherwise we might think this as sacrifices, chas v'shalom. We may get the wrong idea. So the first thing we have to know is, you're an Adam, you're a mensch. You're capable of going beyond limitations. You're capable of transcending all the silliness of life. You're capable because you're an Adam. You're not an animal. And because you're an Adam, you should know you can bring a korban, means you can bring the world closer to God. And where does it begin? Mikem, it starts with you. Before you try to make the world a godly place, what's the first thing you have to make a little more godly? You. And this is like the idea that it says, Kshait atzmacha tchila. The Gemara says, don't go criticizing me, don't try to fix me, first fix yourself. How funny is it when somebody who talks a whole day about carbon emissions takes private planes all over? Or lives in a massive home that nobody needs a large home, or drives massive SUVs that guzzle gas. So the poor person who's struggling to eking out, making a living, you're slapping him with new taxes, and he's trying to barely struggle, and you make him a sugar with green boxes and blue boxes and red boxes and every kind of box. He thinks, I don't understand. One flight of this clown who talks a whole day about global warming, one extra flight is a whole year of my recycling. A whole year of my torment is outweighed, eclipsed by one extra. Who needed that? What could fly first class? You have to. What do you need a private plane for? Who needs it for? Another plane in the air, a big empty plane. It costs $100,000 for what? For a photo op. It's meshuggah, right? So people are not impressed with that. The real leader, if you want to really change somebody, you have to change yourself first. I once heard from a guy who was involved in fundraising. He said when you get people to help you in fundraising, you make these calls. He says the people have to give themselves first. You can't call somebody and say, I'd like you to contribute. What's the first question a person has? Did you contribute? No, I don't contribute. I make calls that you should contribute. If you don't give, what do you expect somebody else to give? But that's really and truly how it is. You have to walk the walk. And then people will be impressed if you talk the talk. So kshet atzmacha. The reality is that if we are steeped in selfishness and we are controlled by our own lusts and desires, and our own slothfulness is what dictates how we live our lives, do you expect them to be able to make the world a godly place? You have to become more godly first. Then you'll criticize others, so to speak. And that's why it says, Adam ki Yakriv Mikem. The first thing is the offering has to come from you. First bring yourself close to Hashem. Mina behema, from the animal, mina bakar. What does this mean? This means that you have to change your animal. Just like an animal only thinks about itself. Just like an animal will do whatever is necessary to get its 5 seconds of pleasure. It doesn't matter who it eats, who it steps on, who it harms, what it breaks, who cares? Bull in the china shop. I got to have my fun. So just like the animal has to be changed, meaning you have to change your own animal, only when you change your own animal, then you can go and try to change the world. And it all begins with prayer, which prayer is metaphorized in the Zohar as a ladder. The ladder in Jacob's vision, the ladder who's rooted in the ground, reaches the highest heavens, which through the concept of prayer, a person is able to lift himself from the ground and to go through the rungs of prayer to reach the highest heavens. And then when you finish reaching the heavens, what should you do next? After you reach out to Hashem through prayer, then you have to make sure to study a little Torah, like it says in Beis HaKnesses, the Beis HaMedrash. So a person says Tehillim after davening, or learns the little Chumash after davening. And then what could he do? Then you can get out there in the world and live the way Hashem wants you to live. Like the Rabbi used to say very often that a person should give tzedakah when he leaves shul. Not only when he comes to shul, when you leave the shul. Why? Because then you start your new day off. This is all a preparation for your day of changing the world. First thing a person does, he gives tzedakah. In other words, until a person's able to then finally reach out and he changes his own animal. And after you change your own animal, after you soften the ground, so to speak, of your own reality, then you have the ability to go outside of the Beis HaKnesses and the Beis HaMedrash and make the world a godly place. And that's the portion of the Mamar we're going to be able to learn. Mamar goes on to develop this on a number of different rungs and concludes with the hope and the prayer that through the efforts we will make, we will merit to see the third Beis HaMikdash rebuilt in our time. B'mheira b'yameinu mamash.
Amen. Clarify the fact that